Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on Carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Dr. Kevin Stock, a strict carnivore, founder of Meat.Health, Kevin Stock Radio, and the Carnivore's Corner Facebook group, returns today. He's also a major self-experimenter and former national-level physique competitor. Kevin and I previously spoke about carnivore for building muscle, dangers of plants, sleep, and optimization on episode 2 of the Carnivore Cast. We're now over 100 episodes. He also shares his findings on his blog, which I read every single post on, Notes to Self at kevinstock.io, and in his Saturday 7 newsletter. Welcome back, Kevin.
Hey, Scott. Good to be back. Man, it's been over 100 episodes, right?
Yeah, crazy.
That is crazy, man. You've been at it.
Yeah. It's been a lot of time. I mean, just learning from you and your consistency. What can I say?
I try. I had some hiccups earlier in the year with consistency, but was able to battle through.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I was going to save that for later on, but let's talk about accountability. You recently started this yearly challenge, and you put out a great video about it, I think before the year even started, talking about the motivation and how to set it up and tips. But what is your challenge this year, and why did you start that?
Oh, so the challenge, the thing I was mentioning about as far as like the beginning of the year, I was having a little bit of like hiccups as far as consistency was in my writing, which is actually not my New Year's challenge. Which is learning how to make music this year. But there's what's related between the two, I guess, is, I've been writing for a long time. And so it's not, maybe I feel like I was getting a little burnt out. But what I did to get around that is instead of just writing long blog articles like I tend to do, I started just creating like 10-slide Instagram carousel posts. And that really helped break through the writing plateau, which we can talk more about here in a little bit, because that's what, I've just been doing a lot of writing lately. But as far as like the New Year's challenge, this year it's learn how to make music, which if anyone knows me, that's how just an absolutely absurd challenge, because I don't have any natural musical ability, no background in music. I definitely can't sing. So it's been a interesting challenge so far. 5 months in, 7 to go. So it's been good.
Very cool. I really like it. And I found it really interesting how you've kept yourself like really accountable and sent out every song right on the day. And I've seen the evolution. It seems like you're already improving a ton. So I'm very excited to see how it ends up. Can you talk about, maybe it's not as helpful for folks because we don't have the visual, but last year what you did and kind of the progress you made?
Yeah. And for people that might be interested, like where did these challenges come from? Because maybe a little bit of context, because last year was learn how to draw, which anyone that knows me is like, I have no drawing ability, had never taken like an art class really. And so last year was learn how to draw. So the challenge in 2019 was to practice at least 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week, practicing drawing. And so I finished that, and, the progress I was pretty, happy to see from start to finish. And it was only, 40 to 50 hours throughout the course of 2019, which doesn't seem like a lot, but kind of just shows, a lot can be accomplished in a little bit amount of time with some consistency. So yeah, that was 2019. 2020 is music, and hopefully seeing similar progress, but it's taken a lot more time this year. So yeah. The goals were different. So 2019 challenge was 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And I thought that was like a good setup, because I would have no excuse to not spend 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week, because, everyone's got 5 minutes. So there's no excuse as far as creating the habit. But if I would have had that goal towards music, I would never get anything done just because it's so much substantially more work to get a song out the door. So this year, the challenge was one song a month. And the reason I set that is because I knew getting the first songs out the door was going to be the biggest challenge. Not so much like making it good, just like how to even do it, like what's even involved. And I knew if I wanted to have a decent song by the end of the year, the only way I was going to be able to do that was just to make as many songs as I could, just terrible initially, and then just improve off that. So basically more of a completion goal and a quantity goal. And so, not that either goal is better or worse than the other, but they kind of serve different purposes.
Yeah, I really like that. The process goals and the completion goals.
Exactly.
That's how I approached the podcast as well. I knew it would be terrible at the start, but hopefully it's improved and the guests have elevated me along the way. What other ideas do you have for future challenges?
Well, so yeah, what I was going to say was, well, why am I even doing these challenges? And a few years ago, more than a few years ago, I gave a lecture last year, a college lecture on, it was to a group of students, as far as like career direction and things like that. It was the first time I kind of explained why I lived kind of a weird life. And it started when I graduated from dental school. I started the dental sleep medicine practice, basically just treating obstructive sleep apnea. So a very unique thing. But anyways, I was sitting in my office waiting for a patient that I think didn't show up. And, I kind of just allowed myself to dream and daydream, and I was like, if I could be doing anything right now, would I be sitting in this office, doing what I'm doing? And it's not that I disliked what I was doing at all. I actually am very, have an extreme interest in sleep and helping sleep. It's a huge problem. But long story short, the answer is no. I'd probably rather be doing X, Y, and Z, right? If anything was possible. And, I just kind of went down a thought tunnel of like, okay, if I create this fantasy life, this impossible fantasy life, and I basically ask, why am I not living that life? And, if I boiled it down, it came down to two things. One would be, I either thought it was impossible, so that's why you wouldn't try for it, right? Or the other option would be you're just afraid. And for me, is more like the fear of giving up what you have for, a better life that you could envision. And after that day, what really kind of excited me was not so much creating this future, impossible life, this fantasy, but it was more to see if I could prove it to myself if it was possible. And that really excited me. So from that day on, I started I had like that model day vision board, and I'm like, okay, let's see if I can create this impossible life. And so one of those things was, in this impossible life, I'd like to be able to draw, wake up one day and just be able to go draw a picture. And one of those other things was like, I'd like to be able to go make music. So that's where those two challenges came from. And so future challenges, I'm still working on coming up what those might be. For example, next year, I don't have the challenge set yet, but I have some ideas in mind.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to that. And I tried to think of some in preparation for this podcast. And the only two I came up with, neither are great. I'm not super wedded to them, but one was public speaking.
That's a great.
And so trying to find some way to give speeches or have
Toastmasters.
Something like that. And then the other was just learning SQL. It's a program that is very useful for a lot of the types of jobs I've been in and look at.
I'll tell you what, you would already crush public speaking because, if you do 100 podcasts, I know it's not public speaking, but it is on the ladder to public speaking. It's there,
Yeah. I got the idea from one of the posts in your Saturday 7 newsletter, actually. It was the one about $10,000 per hour tasks, I think. Right. And it was about giving a speech or learning public speaking is one of the $10,000 per hour tasks. That's a really good article. I'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah. I thought that was a good article too. I think the takeaway from that article that I got was, really looking at your life and saying, what are the actual priorities, the highest priorities, and are you spending the most of your time on your highest priorities? And for most people, I'm guilty of it too. You'd be like, no, I only spent an hour today, whatever that highest priority is. It's like, well, if you're only spending 1 hour a day and it's your number one priority, maybe you got to reevaluate things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all do that. So taking it back to carnivore for a bit, or
Yeah.
nutrition at least. Can we talk a little bit about your carb experiment? I know you've talked about it on your podcast and others' podcasts. But I'd like to hear I think my listeners would really enjoy hearing about it. What encouraged you to try it? How did it work? What were some of your impressions going in, or what did you learn? Maybe we'll just start with those. Don't
Yeah.
feel like you have to answer all of those at once.
No, I mean, it's probably now the most questions I get has to do with carbohydrates, plant-based foods. And so a little backstory is I had gone 2.5 years approximately, maybe a little bit more, with eating just meat. So not 1 gram of fiber, not one cheat meal, nothing. And I got a lot of questions about macronutrients. And so I wanted to write a macronutrient guide. And I was writing this article on carbohydrates, and it's like, I didn't feel like I could complete the article on carbohydrates unless I could speak from personal experience. Because, people are like, well, if I eat carnivore for a year and then will I be able to reintroduce plants? Will I be able to eat fiber? And, I can give people hypothetical answers. I'm like, this is what I think because of X, Y, Z. But I couldn't speak from experience. And so that's what led me to do these carbohydrate experiments. And so the experiments were really really three things. The first one was I wanted to test like just a pure carbohydrate source. And I didn't want to do supplements, so I chose, organic honey. And, in the carnivore groups, like I know in my carnivore group, Carnivore Corner on Facebook, the meat health group, like if someone mentions honey, it turns into like civil war. And I'm like, even in this very, most people are very like helpful, but some reason honey is like a trigger word. So anyways, I was like, all right, I'm going to see what all the fuss is about. So I did basically a jar of honey over the course of, I can't remember if it was 4 days or 5 days, but it was basically, I think it was 100 grams of honey a day, like 50 grams AM pre-workout sometime, and then 50 grams post-workout, I think is how I divided it. And so I can tell you about the results of that, but I'll just go ahead and tell you the other carbs. So after that carb experiment, I went back to just meat only for a while. And then because I wanted to kind of reset the baseline. And then I wanted to test fiber basically. So I had like a day or 2 days of avocado and blueberries to test fiber. Because, I hadn't had fiber in 2.5 years. I was like, is like my microbiome morphed? That's what people keep asking. Like, am I going to be able to like will I just explode?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
did 2 days of that. And then I was going on a trip with my girlfriend, and I was like, this is a perfect time to just, test like a cheat couple days, to see what happens if I just eat what she eats on the vacation. She eats healthy, so I wasn't like overly concerned that I was just going to be like the worst food, but some foods outside of normal for sure. So that was kind of like how I organized the experiment, and like the results were just totally not exactly what I was expecting. So like for honey, for example, I thought for sure, like once I had it, I was going to get hunger cravings. I thought for sure, like I'd have an energy spike and an energy crash. I thought like maybe my muscles would fill out a little bit, like maybe a little bit more pump in the gym, but I really didn't expect that too much because I was pretty sure like my glycogen levels were already stored and such.
Yeah.
So I had certain expectations and they were just totally not met. Like I did not have any cravings. I didn't have like an energy spike or drop. I didn't have, a better pump in the gym. I didn't even have like brain fog or anything. Like it was like the most anticlimactic experience ever. But I mean, we could talk about like why I think that's actually super interesting.
Yeah.
Looking back on it. As far as like the fiber, it was a similar story. Like was 2 avocados and 2 pints of blueberries. No changes like in anything. Like I was totally fine. Bowels were just absolutely the same. Digestion was the same. I was like, man, this is really kind of interesting. And the cheat meal, I did fine. There was one thing I remember that there were some spices one night that started giving me a little bit of indigestion. But I was basically none of these experiments fazed me in a significantly negative way at all. And some of the biggest takeaways for me were, well, one is like, if you could take 2.5 years, like eating just meat and getting super healthy, and killing, basically addictions, carb addictions, sugar addictions, when I had like a little bit of sugar, like with the honey or with the ice cream on my cheat day, normally like the old Kevin would have been like, I need more, I need more, I need more, I need more. Whereas when I did this experiment, like I was like, the ice cream was absolutely delicious. I loved it, but I was like, I had like a spoonful, and I was like, oh, that's good. That's all I need. Which anyone that knows old Kevin, that is not me. Like I would crush the entire half gallon. Same thing with the honey, and so I mean, the experiments taught me a lot, and I think maybe one of the biggest takeaways maybe one of the biggest benefits of the carnivore diet is reestablishing a healthy relationship with food, because I think one of the biggest downfalls is a carb addiction where you have a little bit and you can't stop there. Like you need more, you need more, you need more, or you're always feeling neglected for food. But when you fix like this basic underlying relationship with food, things get easier. Like I didn't need to eat a whole half gallon or a whole gallon of ice cream. Like I was good with just a taste. I'm like, oh, okay, that's good enough.
This episode is brought to you by Optimal Carnivore. Optimal Carnivore was created by carnivores for carnivores. They've recently released a new product, a grass-fed bone marrow. It is the whole bone extract, which includes the bone marrow, the cartilage, and collagen peptides. Our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, including bones, and especially the marrow. All the nutrients and substances that your body needs to build, repair, and maintain your bones, teeth, and connective tissue can come from the bone marrow. It's a complex that contains the same components as home-cooked bone broth, but making bone broth can be a hassle. You have to source high-quality bones, boil them for days, and this is a simple, convenient alternative that's gently freeze-dried so it preserves all the nutrients completely intact. It's perfect for people who are traveling or don't have time to make bone broth themselves. Visit www.amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code carnivore10 to receive 10% off your purchase. Super interesting. And the point I hadn't heard you talk about it as much, but I remember you mentioning it, the fact that you were more resilient and more able to handle the carbs, both in terms of cravings, in terms of your blood glucose spiking, how you felt, your digestion is really fascinating to me, because I feel like many people come to carnivore, come to keto, and maybe it's just that they haven't been on it long enough. You'd been on a strict carnivore diet for 2 years, 3 years at this point?
Yeah.
A lot of people will say, any spices, any gluten, any exposure to some of these quote unquote toxic or negative foods would just set them off. And it's almost like being carnivore makes you more fragile, which isn't ideal. You feel better overall at baseline, but you're more fragile. And it sounds like you kind of had the opposite experience.
Well, I don't know if I would say opposite, because I didn't eat these in extreme quantity. And it's something we'll talk about.
Sure.
Because I feel like it makes you more sensitive. And a good example, so for those that are interested, I have this long article on carbohydrates on my website.
Yeah, it's great.
Way more in depth. It's actually, the biggest criticism is like, it's just way too long, which I have a problem doing, but I feel like context is so important. I feel like that's what's missing in like today's world of social media and quick bites, where I'm like, if I wrote, oh, I did carbs and I did fine, you take that out of context and be like, oh, okay, Kevin's a carb eater and that's what he recommends. But so anyways, there's lots of context in the article. But I think if you go carnivore for a long time or a significant amount of time, what it does is it increases your sensitivity to things that you may become insensitive to. Meaning, okay, for example, I remember my trip down to Chicago, which was the cheat day. I had some of my girlfriend's coffee, which she put like a sweetener packet in it. And I've never had like an adverse taste to sweet packets. Like I used to actually love them. I'm probably like free calories, right? I would just down, free sugar packets.
Yeah.
But I remember I tasted that and distinctly remember I was like, this is disgusting. And one of the things is my taste buds, I think, are just so much more sensitive to sweetness. And it's not that I had an adverse reaction to sweetness. It's just like I was much more sensitive to it. And I think that's what people have with, if they reintroduce, plant-based foods in any significant quantity, and they're like, whoa, I'm now real sensitive to this. I think it might be more of a consequence of, you've now have this healthy baseline that you've established. And if you're deviating off that in a negative way, you notice it more. And so I don't disagree with that. I had and I've seen some of that in the carb experiments that I've done since then. Whereas if I have a little bit of carbs, I tend to do just fine, almost with anything. But if I have a lot of carbs, almost with anything, I feel bad.
Yeah.
And it's not that I think that it's like, oh, I'm more fragile now. I just think like, okay, up to a point, my body can handle this, but past that point, I start feeling side effects. It's not like that much different from like alcohol, where, in college, where I overly drank, when I'm not a healthy thing, but I could get up and get going the next day, drink that night, get going the next day. Whereas now I don't drink anymore. But if I do, I remember a few years ago, I remember I drank and, it wrecked me. And it's not that it's like I'm more fragile, but it's like, okay, now I'm desensitized to it in a way of speaking.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. And what would you say, like, some of your learnings in terms of practical takeaways for you? Like, what are carbs good for? What would you maybe change for future muscle building or fat loss phases, or not at all?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. And there's actually a lot to there because, I talk about what is the case for carbohydrates? Is there a case for carbohydrates? Should we all be zero carb? And I do think there is a case for carbohydrates. And I think there's, 4 or 5 things that actually make sense to have carbs in the diet. And I can go through some of them. One would be like adaptation, for example, because, oh my goodness, I get a lot of messages, people going through the adaptation. And while in general, I am an advocate of just pulling the Band-Aid off, meaning just going straight, diving into the deep end, going straight carnivore, get rid of all the carbs. For some people, that is just, not the way to go. And they try it and, they give it their best shot and they give up and they throw the baby out with the bathwater. Where if they just, kept in a half of avocado for breakfast, their meal 1, a half avocado for meal 2, that little bit of carb, that little bit of fiber could have, really alleviated some of the symptoms. You don't have to you don't got to throw out the baby with the bathwater,
Yeah.
So there is a case for like carbs weaning into carnivore. That said, there's downfalls of weaning into carnivore. Like I said, most people I recommend, rip the Band-Aid off, suffer for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. Usually it's not that long, but, have the expectation of suffering and then get through it. Because, sometimes, weaning in is like slowly pulling off the Band-Aid, slowly tiptoeing into the cold water where it's like, all right, it would have been better just to jump into the cold water and get used to it. So I think that's one case. I think another case for carbs is adhering to a meat-based diet. And it's something I talk a lot about, whereas, there's kind of like, it's overly simplified, but there's 2 kinds of people, let's just say. And there's one kind of person where, 100% is easier than 98%, meaning, if they're 100% carnivore and they know anything else is off the menu, it's easier for them. Whereas if they have a little bit of this, they'll fall right off, right? So 100% is easier than 98%. Whereas I know a lot of people, they say, as long as I'm 95% or 90% meat-based, but I have that 5 to 10% flexibility, I can, adhere to this healthy diet long-term. And, really that's the goal, right? Long-term health. And so it just makes sense for that kind of person. Like, yeah, that 5 to 10% of, plant-based food, whatever it might be, is far better than throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So when it comes to adhering, long term, I think that's a real case for carbs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I talk about it often on the podcast that carnivore isn't black or white. And if someone needs, some ice cream with protein powder or some roasted vegetables or some keto desserts just to be compliant and eat mostly a meat-based diet, then that's fantastic. I wouldn't try to stop them from doing that if it meant either that or standard American diet or something else.
Yeah, and I think something that, we have to take into consideration is like lifestyle. Because even if you're eating something that is not the best for you, but it really adds to your quality of life and it makes you happy, then, it kind of makes sense to keep it in there. And as like a bad example is, maybe it's not a bad example, but alcohol. I personally don't drink. But for a lot of people, they want to go have a couple beers with friends. And if they can't have that, well, then they're going to say, no, screw this, right? So lifestyle is a big factor because no one's going to really argue. I don't think that many people are going to argue that, maybe some people would, but in general, most people are like, okay, alcohol is not a health food. All right. This is not, It's not like a good thing to put in your body. But like, so I think lifestyle is a super important thing to, keep in mind, because if someone's going to eat a diet that's going to make them healthy, but they're going to be unhappy the whole time, really it's a short-term solution because they're going to ditch it. Right. So it kind of goes back to adhering, to make it work with your life and your goals. And some people's goals, I think this is what you were asking about. I do think there is a case for carbs for certain goals, certain performance, I'll say bodybuilding goals, especially. Because like when it comes to hypertrophy, I wasn't before I did the carbohydrate experiment and subsequent kind of carb experiments. But I think for people that are really trying to get to the utmost of body composition, bodybuilding, like build as much muscle as they possibly can or get as lean as they possibly can. I think we need to talk about getting lean as you possibly can, because that's like the biggest misunderstood thing. But I do think there's a case for carbohydrates for the right person with the right goals at the right time, the right carb sources in the right amount. Which is why I don't recommend it for most people, because most people don't fit that outlier thing, But I do think there are some people that, do fit that outlier, and some carbs can help, I think, put on additional muscle mass. If bodybuilding is like the number one goal, or if getting as lean as you possibly can is the number one goal. And I think with the leanness is where it gets missed, because people understand, get as big as you possibly can. Carbs help you eat more. They're highly insulinogenic, the most insulinogenic thing you can eat, more so than proteins or fat. And so insulin is anabolic hormone, which is going to help make you grow. And so I think there is a case for carbs in these realms. And when it comes to fat loss, when you're trying to get as lean as you possibly can while holding as much muscle as possible, the number one concern becomes not losing muscle mass, actually. So anyone that's kind of really dieted down for a bodybuilding competition, if they just focus fat loss, keep dropping calories, they'll realize they just start getting bad saying, but skinny fat. They just start shrinking.
Yeah,
they're losing muscle and they're losing fat. You're not looking any better. You're actually looking worse as time goes on. So when you start getting super lean, the goal is actually to make your body hold on to that muscle, which is not a state that it wants to do. Muscle is very energetically expensive and you don't have any fat. The body doesn't want to keep losing fat. It wants to lose muscle. And so in order to keep that muscle on there, carbohydrates can play a role through this insulin stimulating to help hold that muscle mass when you are dieting down super lean. So I do think there's a case in these extremes for carbohydrates. I don't think most people fit that extreme. And even a lot of people that do think they fit that extreme, like I talk to them, like, you actually aren't at that extreme yet. Like, you should try and put on more muscle without carbs first, or you should try and get leaner without carbs first. And that's kind of like a tool at the end. It's almost better to think of it as a supplement than as like a food group, in my opinion. That way, at least from a bodybuilding perspective.
Yeah, I really like that. As you always say, like, eat meat, get your health back, then focus on some of these goals way further down the line. Adapt first. And do you think you'll be using carbs in a targeted fashion for your future muscle building or fat loss phases, Kevin?
I don't know. I think because right now I'm not at one of those extremes. Like I feel like I could put on more muscle by just eating meat. So I don't feel like I'm at the point where I need it as a tool to put on more muscle. I think if I was at like 9 months into a bulking cycle and I was like, I'm going to bulk for like 3 more months, probably cycling in some carbohydrates would be beneficial, or towards the end of a cut. So I think probably in the future I'll do that, because as much as I've gotten away from like the bodybuilding body composition, it's not a top priority anymore.
Yeah.
It is still something it doesn't make a lot of sense basically to anyone unless they're in it. But it's like, I love like the art and science of bodybuilding. It's interesting to me. It's fun to tinker with. So I'm not counting that out, but I think it's more of something I will use more at the extremes.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And let's talk about protein. You mentioned that you've been doing some of these shorter 10-slide Instagram posts, which I found great. They're actually packed with information compared to the average Instagram posts, but in a really digestible way. You've had some about protein and gout, other topics. One just that was interesting to me is just too much protein. So can you talk about why this is not a real thing and maybe who's eating too much protein?
Yeah. So yeah, and first of all, the 10 slide thing has been really good for me. So anyone that's a writer that has writer block, it just forced me to get like creative in a new way that helps kind of bust through writer's block, but it also helps me like get super concise, super clear thoughts. Because if you're trying to condense like what would be 1,000-word article into 10 slides, like you have to only hit the important things. And it does lose some context, which, oh well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the good news is I've turned all these 10 slide things. Now I'm done with them, and I'm putting the protein article together as we speak, not literally,
Nice.
but it's almost done.
Yeah.
So there'll be more context around it, but yeah, so who is eating too much protein? So it's one of the real common fears, right? Too much protein. I think it's centered. Well, there's 5 distinct things I talk about in the To Be article. One is the primary fear, gluconeogenesis, right? Because a lot of people on carnivore come from maybe a ketogenic background, or they want to be in ketosis, some level of nutritional ketosis. So the fear is you eat too much protein, it turns steak into cake. So might as well just eat the cake, right? So that's kind of fear number 1. Fear number 2 is gout. Significant amount of people have issues with gout, and typically, if you go to your doctor and you have gout, they're going to probably tell you to cut back on meat because it's high in purines. Purines turn to uric acid into gout. So that's the fear around that. And so, we can unpack why that fear is unfounded, but that's another fear of too much protein, which is unfounded in my opinion. A third one would be bone health, right? Because meat's acidic. And so if you eat a lot of meat, then the body's got to, regulate the pH. So in order to do that, it's got to leach calcium out of the bones, right, to keep the pH stable. And if you're eating just meat, then you don't even have a lot of calcium in your diet, which probably makes matters even worse. So you're probably going to get osteoporosis. So that's kind of the third fear of protein. I would say a fourth fear is probably a lot of protein hurts your kidneys, right? It overworks your kidneys. We've heard that. And, I go into kind of the research on that's just not founded whatsoever. And then I think kind of a lesser fear is longevity, but there is some people that think if you eat a lot of protein, it's going to decrease your longevity. So those are kind of like the 5 top fears. Did I miss any that you're worried about?
I think one, and this is why I wanted to dig a little bit more into why you're eating a lot of protein.
Yeah.
It's replacing the other macronutrients, which 99% of the time is good. You want less fat and less carbs. And Ted Naiman talks about this all the time with his protein to energy ratio. The more you have protein, it's very hard to store protein as body fat, right? It's not really an energy source. It's a building block. But when you have so much protein, it's not that, it turns into chocolate cake. It's that you're depriving your body of the 2 main energy sources, carbs and fat. So it has to undergo this potentially metabolically expensive process, which long term, I'm not convinced. I don't know either way, but I'm not convinced is a great thing to always having to be getting a lot of your energy from gluconeogenesis because you're eating such little fat and carbs, not because you're eating so much protein, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. And I think part of what you kind of touched on is the fear, or at least one of them is that you have to do all this gluconeogenesis. So people would be like, well, why is that bad? Right. And some people might think, because it's going to elevate your cortisol, which is a stressor. And, if you constantly have this stressor over time, I would agree, that's probably not a good thing. Right. And one of the things that, I talk about in the article, but we can just discuss a little bit now, is cortisol does stimulate gluconeogenesis in an extreme severe response. So, for example, if your blood sugar drops below, let's say 55 milligrams per deciliter, the body's going to release cortisol. It's going to, release stored glycogen from your liver to bring your blood glucose up, and it's going to stimulate gluconeogenesis to create glucose. However, if you are just not eating a lot of carbohydrates and you're eating a lot of protein, and so you're going to do some gluconeogenesis, right? The body doesn't drop to 55 milligrams per deciliter of blood glucose. It stays, I think, gluconeogenesis with glucagon will be secreted at like, I believe it's 65 milligrams per deciliter. So you're never going to get that elevated cortisol response. Gluconeogenesis is this ongoing process that's going to happen anyways. And so the cortisol fear, which I think is underlying a lot of people's, is not really the issue that they think it is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And how about for you? How much protein do you eat, Kevin, and why?
So I don't track macros, but I would say, and what I would like to eat is somewhere around 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight. I probably do 2 quite frequently. I never really want to go below 1 gram per pound, just basically body composition reasons. And I think that should probably be most people's like baseline. Is it just a good baseline is 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight? I think erring on the high side, 1.5 is even better because most people have body composition goals. And I am very much convinced that, erring on the high side of protein is, for many people, a better way to achieve their body composition goals. And I use very general, vague, most people, because it's not everyone. Some people do better if maybe people that are extremely insulin resistant, if they do limit protein a little bit below that, have more fat, until they start regaining some degree of insulin sensitivity. But nonetheless, I err on the high side of protein. I think most people would benefit from erring on the high side of protein, because there's no real downfalls of being a little bit having too much protein, except for people that need to be in some deep levels of ketosis for, some underlying medical condition, whether it's epilepsy or cancer or whatnot. So I err on the high side of protein. Like you said, it's kind of, it can just replace some macronutrients. So if you're not eating any carbohydrates, I think you definitely need to eat more protein. You definitely need to eat more fat too. So it's kind of just as a way of, if you had 3 macronutrients to play with and you're not eating carbohydrates, now you have 2 macronutrients to play with. And I think you can be quite successful anywhere, ketogenic ratios where 70% of calories are coming from fat, 70+%. I do great at that level. I know at that level of fat consumption, I will eat a little bit more total calories and hold a little bit more body fat than if I eat, say, 60% protein and 40% fat, 60% fat, 40% protein. Even 50-50, which is not uncommon for me. And I know people think it's, that's unsustainable, but like I've done super high protein where it's even further skewed than that for so long that I'm not convinced there's really any significant, at least short-term, consequences. The long-term consequences are a little bit harder to gauge because there's really just zero research. So everything's kind of hypothetical. But even then, the amount of research I've done in this, I just don't see the long-term danger of super high protein. But not the dead horse.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And just to play kind of devil's advocate,
please do.
Once you hit, a gram per pound of protein, or even 1.5 grams per pound, why not fill in some of the rest of your remaining calories for the day, whether you're bulking or cutting, with fat or carbs, if that would be an easier source of energy, if it could potentially be more satiating, given that you've already satisfied your protein needs. Why not try to get it from an energy source that would be more readily available rather than just having a lot more protein?
Yeah. So if I replaced it with more fat, what would happen for me is the fat is not more satiating. I will eat more. So strictly just from a body composition reason. If I just threw vanity out the window and I just wanted to feel good, be healthy, I would replace it with fat. I think sitting around ketogenic ratio of 70% fat, 30% protein, for me, I feel great. Body composition is good. It's a great place to be. And I think a lot of people find success, in that ballpark. So I'm not saying you shouldn't replace it with fat. I think there is downsides to replacing with carbs for sure. But how much, a little bit of carbs, like we kind of talked about, could be just totally fine. It could be a gateway drug, so to speak, to other places. But so you definitely can, I think. And I think so. There's something called the protein leverage hypothesis, which is long story short, it's this hypothesis that protein is kind of the macronutrient that determines how much we eat, so to speak. And really the research shows that up to about 15% of your calories coming from protein is kind of like I'll call it the protein floor. Meaning if you are below 15%, protein without a doubt is the most satiating nutrient. It's the most crucial nutrient. Your body's going to, keep eating to try and at least reach that floor. And if you stay under that floor, you're going to keep overeating both carbs and fat in order to get to that 15% protein level. But once that 50% protein level is reached, the satiating effects of protein do start to wane in comparison to what, fat. However, carbs, they do the opposite. There's some interesting research with kids who are drinking regular soda, and when they stop drinking the regular soda, let's say they drink 2 regular sodas a day, which would be equal, let's just say 250 calories. Well, if they stop drinking the 250 calories from soda, they don't only decrease their calorie consumption by 250 calories, they decrease it by more than that. So, I mean, the moral of that story is the sugar was making them not only eat 250 calories, but over and above that as well.
Yeah.
Kind of appetite stimulating. So if we're talking about hunger, then I think, protein is the most crucial macronutrient, but then it starts to wane and fat starts to, become more and more important.
Yeah.
And it's worth saying some people just do much better, like higher fat and, a little bit less protein, maybe 80-20 or something like that. And so if, we got to start talking about what's their goal. Does it feel good or is it to look a certain way or whatnot? And then, that kind of helps, dictate what macronutrient strategy might be the best for someone.
Yeah, totally agree. I think all the points you brought up with, I would echo, and this is why I'm such a fan of experimentation and people trying some of these things out for themselves.
Yeah, and having a super clear, like, what are my objectives, my goals? Because a lot of people aren't clear on that. And then once you get crystal clear, you're like, okay, now this strategy might work better than this strategy. But without that clear, kind of goal, then it's hard to, make any kind of recommendations.
Right. And you've had, Sean Baker, the Strong Sisters, Paul Saladino on your podcast. You've been on William Schufeld's channel, Paul's channel, the Strong Sisters, yourself. Have you any of these kind of changed your approach or made you question your approach to carnivore regarding foods, how you eat, how you source food, or fat to protein ratios, things like that? Or has it been more intellectual? I'm curious if it's like changed anything practically for you, Kevin.
Yeah, what's interesting is, so I think like we actually all have a little bit different approaches. Like Paul is really big on the nose to tail approach. Dr. Sean Baker's not. He's more muscle meat, and the Armstrong sisters have, for, personal health reasons, started to eat more plant-based foods. I think, which I think is interesting is, like, if you look at, all of us, I think there's one, real common thing is that we're all really advocates for meat-based diets. And, how you structure your meat-based diet a little bit differently, there's room for play and experimentation there. But I think, we're all on the same page as if you take human health, human nutrition, the foundation of that is going to be a meat-based nutrition. It's not to say you can't get some nutrition from plants. It's not to say there's not cases for nose to tail. But I think overall, we just kind of agree that foundation is it should be, or, for most people, a meat-based diet. And, changing things here and there can be optimal for some people versus other people. Because I love Paul, but I don't think people need to eat a nose to tail diet to have long-term crazy health success. So, I mean, we might have slightly differing opinions. Baker and I seem to see eye to eye on most things. However, I bet you he would say, no, I don't think there's any case for carbs as far as performance, because he's not eating any carbs and he's performing at the highest level. And I think for some performance exercises, carbs probably don't, convey any benefit, or probably more detrimental. But I do think for certain performance, bodybuilding kind of stuff, I do think there is a case for carbs. So maybe we disagree a little bit there, maybe not. But I mean, long story short is I think we're all mostly on the same page of, we're meat-based diet is the foundation. Tweak here, tweak there to optimize for yourself. Because we all have differences, slight genetic differences, even though we are all far more similar than we are different. So yeah, I think I hope maybe that's clear.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the foundation is completely the same. And you mentioned that, your priorities have shifted a little bit away from bodybuilding and physique overall. Did you mean more towards your writing and like the song goals and your work?
So yes. So what led me into the carnivore diet was early in 2017 is when I decided, you know what, this bodybuilding stuff is coming at the cost of my mental performance. Like I was drinking a ton of coffee. I was not sleeping well. I would have like energy crashes in the afternoon. Like trying to get work done in the afternoon was like, all right, not happening. And so at that time I was like, look, this, body composition is something I've really been passionate about and I've enjoyed, but it's going to take a back seat because I've had a lot of, we're starting a couple different businesses and I needed to get a lot of mental work in every single day. And so that's what kicked it all off. And, long story short, going through a ketogenic diet, finally, ending up on an all meat diet, I finally found exactly what I was looking for. And so, yes, I would say that is still kind of my number one priority. Body composition is right there with it, but it's not that these priorities are at odds. Like I was saying, like I have a body composition I'm very happy with and a mental performance I'm very happy with. Now, could I have slightly more muscle, slightly leaner, but sacrifice significant mental performance? Yes, I could, I could do that. But, it's not that these two goals are at odds with each other. Just the extremes of body composition, I think, tend to be at odds with the, optimizing, kind of mental performance.
Yeah, that's one of the takeaways I had from your lecture at the university, which I really enjoyed. Folks can find it on Kevin's YouTube channel, was the way to live this integrated, holistic life where you can pursue all of these different interests and passions without being completely obsessed and dedicated to one, but still very accomplished in all of them.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to watch that. I mean,
yeah, I thought it was super valuable. I think if I was a college sophomore, junior, or senior watching that, it would make a huge impression on me. So that was really inspiring.
I was super out of my comfort zone because it's public speaking, which I've gotten more comfortable with. But the other thing was, the question's always in my mind, who am I to tell someone, this is how to go live your life, what do I know kind of thing. And so just being able to share kind of, what's gone through my head, you can take it or leave it. But yeah, I mean, kind of one of the things that I shared with them that, other people have told me has been valuable is I used to feel very guilty that I had all these interests. Like because any given day I'm working on like 6 or 7 different projects. And it's like, okay, there's this common thing where it's like, if you're so scattered, spread thin, like you try and do everything, you do nothing. And I felt guilty. I'm like, I feel like I need to be focusing on one thing so I can accomplish something, right? That's where I'm going to find success if I just put all my eggs in one basket and focus on that basket. And a lot of people still tell like that's the way to, find success. And I don't disagree. Like that's a way to find success, but I don't think that's necessarily right for everyone. And so in the talk, I kind of talked about like, once I just said, look, this is who I am. I kind of have this controlled ADD, meaning like I have all these interests and I pursue them. But that's what works for me. And
yeah, that's great. That's awesome. And Kevin, going back to the fitness aspect for a minute, how are you maintaining your shape or what are your current goals with your physique during the kind of COVID lockdown and how is that working for you?
Yeah. So literally the day before the day my gym shut down because of COVID, I was going to start doing a carnivore cut again, and I was all set. And
yeah,
once the gym closed down, I have like a little bit of home stuff, but not much. So I was like, I'm not doing a cut without weights. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like when you're cutting, I'm not so worried about the fat loss. I'm worried about losing muscle. So my number one priority in a fat loss cut is not losing muscle. I know the fat is going to come off with just some strategy, but not losing muscle is the number one goal. And if I don't have the weights to keep that muscle around, I'm not doing a cut. So I abandoned that strategy. And I actually, for the first time in over 20 years, took basically an entire month off weight training.
Wow.
And yeah, I don't think in the last 20 years I've taken more than 2 weeks off. And so I took an entire month off, and I used the time to focus on something that I had neglected forever. And I knew I was neglecting it. I knew it was detrimental. And so I decided to, double down on it, focus on it, and that is mobility. And so I started doing these yoga classes every day, and I went from absolutely horrendous mobility to just bad right now. So I'm I'm gradually getting to okay. So that's what I did for a month, and I've continued to do yoga or stretches. I won't call it yoga because so we can talk a little bit about it, but basically I've moved more into just kind of working on mobility. I like to do kind of resistance mobility stuff. But I've since added some home workouts. I got this system called the X3 bar, which is basically resistance bands, which I've liked. It's helped me do resistance training in my limited space I have. And I've liked it for various things. So right now, those are kind of the things I'm doing. I'm doing a lot of mobility work. I'm doing some strength training. And kind of the goal is, build a little bit of muscle, but build mobility. I'm not trying to do a cut or anything like that. So, that's kind of where I'm at. And it's funny because on my to-do list this week, which is tomorrow, I was going to record like my 3 months of learning, my takeaways of 3 months of yoga, and basically my favorite exercises that I'm doing to try and get it into a 10 to 20 minute session. Because that's the one reason why I didn't do mobility work in the past, is because it would just eat into the weight training, and I only have so much time in a day, and I would always choose weight training over mobility work. But I know if I can do a 10 to 20 minute session, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, I could fit that into my schedule with the weight training, and I know it would be beneficial. So basically, I was going to shoot a video that says, look, this is my 15-minute session that I found to be my favorite of the various, yoga poses and stretches and whatnot.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm looking forward to that because I feel the same way. I feel like there's just this ocean of mobility exercises and workout there, and I would love to have like the bite-sized, minimal effective dose Kevin Stock version of it. So,
and I think a lot of the yoga tends to be geared more towards females, and just males tend to be like more inflexible.
Yeah.
So just like embarrassingly bad. So this is going to be the 20-minute male, really bad mobility, working our way to getting just, decent. So that's kind of what I've tried to do is that minimum effective dose. That's exactly, well put.
Awesome. And what are some of the next topics you'd like to dive into with regards to your writing and your blog? Like what can people be looking forward to in the future? Well,
the macronutrient guide is the thing that's coming out next. And it's probably 75% done. It's crazy to see how long I've been working on it. It's almost been 9 months. It turned into like the first ebook I wrote, which was Health Dangers of a Plant-Based Diet. It kind of just started off like I was going to just write about certain, it started off as like a small idea, and then it just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew and turned into like a full-fledged ebook. Well, this kind of took the same trajectory, whereas like this guide's going to be like almost like a small book. But that's the next thing that's coming out. And then, I just asked in my newsletter last week or 2 weeks ago, like, I was debating on what to work on next. And one of the things that I have been researching over the last several years is sustainability, and specifically food sustainability. And I think it's an important topic because there is a lot of misunderstanding there, kind of just like nutrition in general. And it's something I really want to just dive into. And it's a gigantic undertaking because once you start, kind of peeling back the layers of sustainability, it's like there's more layers and more layers and more layers. It's that thing like the more you learn, the more you find out you don't know. And then, so I've dug very, very deep into that rabbit hole, and I want to try and make that rabbit hole more accessible to other people without having to dive so deep. So I'm thinking that's what I'm gonna do next. I asked Saturday 7 readers and got like hundreds of responses, and that won overwhelmingly sustainability. But what was interesting is people wrote in that they're really interested to learn more about hormones and related to the carnivore diet, which was tricky for me because there's a lot of hormones and they're very complex, and so I don't really know what people want there because, like, for example, in the protein article I'm working on in the gluconeogenesis section, I write a lot about insulin and glucagon and cortisol and how they're related to gluconeogenesis. And it's kind of like, I don't want to call it a complex interaction, but it's semi-substantial. But that's not all insulin does, and that's not all glucagon does. That's not all cortisol does. They all interact with all these other things. So it's such a complex web that I'd have to really think about how to present that information in a digestible way. So I don't know if I could. I don't know if I could do that. So, well, I don't know if that. I know I need to write more about that because I'm not sure what exactly people are asking with related to hormones. But that was a very common write-in, and so it's something I probably need to address.
Yeah, I think it could be a great series, similar to your plant one. I'm sure it would get very complex, but you could pick like 5 of the most important hormones and dive deep on them. I think that'd be super interesting.
Like testosterone, thyroid,
insulin, testosterone, thyroid, maybe like ghrelin/leptin. It could be a dual one. Estrogen. I'd have to think more about it, but that could be really cool.
On and on. Like, just write about glucagon in this last article.
Yeah.
It's almost like even I'm like, what I'm writing about, I'm like, man, this thing is super important.
Yeah.
This is very, like, plays a role in everything.
You could almost have like a cool like table, which is like each of those hormones, or maybe like even 8 to 10 of them, and then carbs, fat, protein, and the different ways in which eating them affects them. Yeah. I think that'd be super interesting.
It's actually a fast display way to, display that data.
Yeah. Cool. Well, super looking forward to that and all of your other work, Kevin, as usual. Where can folks find out more about you? And I'll provide links in the show notes at carnivorecast.com, and anywhere else.
Cool. Yeah, I'm in all the usual places, but I just think the best place is probably just the newsletter. That's where I share the, kind of whatever's the latest and greatest stuff and some stuff that I work on. And it's kind of just like my central hub. And so it's just a Saturday 7 newsletter. And I'm in the social places. The Kevin Stock 12 is my handle. I think we're on most of those.
Great. Well, really appreciate you coming on, Kevin. It's been a pleasure. Feel like I learn a lot every time I hear you speak. And I hope listeners will too. So thanks again.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it.
For sure. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, Scott.
Bye.
See ya.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered? Or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.